Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Let's face it, the future is now. We're living in a connected cyber society, and we need to stop ignoring it or pretending that it's not affecting us. Join us as we explore how humanity arrived at this current state of digital reality and what it means to live amongst so much technology and data. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high net worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io. BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com.
Marco.
Sean.
4 divided. Wow. Just used the word. You messed up right off the bat.
What did you do?
4 over 2.
4 over 2?
2 into 4.
What are we doing? Math now?
We're doing math, exactly. We're doing division. That's why I messed up and used the actual word and the tease word that I was using for my kick.
Wow. So you wanted to play with divide? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
if you take 4 and you do it by 2, you end up 2 on the other side. I don't know.
I want to have what you're having.
Yeah, it's called an immunity boost. Clearly, it's not working yet.
Well, I'll tell you what. We are actually here to have a good time, and it seems like we're already doing that. And at the same time, to have a serious conversation about something that, in my opinion, it's a little bit unexpected. When I heard about this topic, I was like, I can't to think about it. I had to divide, and then I had to multiply, and then I have to do some other crazy formula. But you know me, I'm not a math person. You're
all about dividing and conquering. Mark.
Yeah, but apart from math, what really made me think is every time we talk about anything regarding cybersecurity, anything regarding technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, everything is driven by data. Data is the new oil, data is this, data is that. Privacy is a big issue. What do they do with all this data? They put it in this big cloud computer, and then maybe they'll use it in the future. I mean, Sean, that's the kind of conversation we hear. And then I'm like, some portion of our society are actually left without enough data. And I was like, what?
We overfish the data in the sea.
Yeah, because
none left for anybody to use.
Well, it just made me think, and I associated that with the digital divide, and now there is the data divide as well. So I'm interested to understand.
I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, it sounds like right straight in the middle at the intersection of technology and society. So without further ado, we have Gillian Diebold here, and I'm feeling really proud because I think I pronounced it correctly, that is joining us on the show. So apart from the usual rambling and a little bit of fun that Sean and I have at the beginning, we want to welcome to this episode of Redefining Society, and we would like to hear who you are, what you do, and what is this research that you're presenting.
Definitely. So my name's Gillian, and I'm a policy analyst at the Center for Data Innovation in Washington, D.C., which is part of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, ITIF. It's kind of a mouthful, all the different names. But basically what we do at the center is we promote public policies designed to maximize the benefits of data-driven innovation in the public and private sectors. So part of the think tank work involves kind of educating policymakers and the public about the opportunities and challenges associated with data. And then we talk about the key technology trends like open data, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things. And so I joined the center a little bit over a year ago, actually, and I lead my team's work on digital inequalities and data disparities. So most recently, I actually just put out a report on the issue that Marco introduced called the data divide, which is sort of the social and economic inequalities that kind of result from that lack of data collection about certain individuals and communities. So like Marco said, a lot of the discourse right now is around privacy and sort of over collection of data, but we kind of turn the issue on its head and think about what happens when subgroups are completely left out of data sets, or, are underrepresented in those data sets. And really what I find is that, while there's been all these advances in technology that's made it really easier and cheaper than ever to use and produce and collect data, people are still really lacking access to some of that data about themselves, and therefore they can't really put it to use, and so they can't really benefit from that data-driven innovation that we at the center are really trying to promote. So it's kind of turning all these issues on their head, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into it further with you both.
Yeah, I love it. And you already started to touch on what data divide is. And as I think both Marco and I were alluding to, we've heard the concept of digital divide, which effectively is people can have access and others don't always have access to the digital world. And what is the data divide in the formal definition? And perhaps how does it relate and maybe even connect to a digital divide?
Yeah, so I think I kind of just said it, but I think our formal definition is sort of the social and economic inequalities that result from that lack of data collection and use about some individuals and communities. And so it really, we kind of coined this term, and actually the center has been writing and using this term for actually almost a decade now. And so I've kind of taken it because it's becoming this really prominent issue, which we can get into where that appetite lies. But I think it builds off that. We use the term data divide because it builds off that digital divide concept, the gap in use and access. And this is sort of gaps in use, access, collection of data rather than just internet connected technologies. And I think they're really connected in a lot of ways. A lot of the same people that are thinking about who has access to broadband and internet connected technologies, are ICTs in general are, they're really interested in these same issues when it comes to data. But at the same time, I think it's important to think about that these divides and data divides, so to speak, can really emerge in a lot of different ways. And it's not just in terms of access to internet connected technology. So it's also in terms of access to, and by access, I mean representation in federal statistics, or who has, sensor data collected about their neighborhood and what that neighborhood looks like, that kind of breakdown. So it's not just, who can go and find information on the internet, or, who can complete their job or their school or whatever online. And who has what those devices, but it's also those actual data-driven devices. So think about like wearable technology, or at your doctor's office, or does your health system have the electronic health records? Things like that. It's sort of taking it in this much broader scope than just thinking about, access to the internet. It's thinking about data in a really broad kind of holistic way.
Yeah, and do you look at it from a creation perspective, an ownership perspective, a use perspective? And maybe, I don't know if an example or two might help, because I'm just picturing, okay, so I create, or I don't know, I have access to shopping information, right? And I can choose the best place to shop at the right time, or I can get deliveries at the right whatever. And I might not have that information handy, and therefore I just shop wherever I think is okay. That's probably a really bad example. But then there are companies that use the data I create to do other things that may or may not serve me. So who owns that data? So I guess the question is, and maybe an example or two, what data is being looked at and how is it being looked at?
Definitely. I think the report that I just authored, I think it covers kind of, it's a broad issue, right? So you have to take that really broad lens. I think I don't get necessarily into as much as data ownership, although that is definitely an emerging area, especially around that concept of data sovereignty. I think it's more, about who's generating the data and then who's using that data. And so ideally, in a perfect world, you're both generating it and you're getting to use it. And that's really the idea we're promoting here. So I think, there's many examples. The report I kind of walk through, demographic data gaps, meaning gaps in representation, access, use among, race, income, gender, age, disability, that kind of demographic. Then there's geographic data gaps. So, based on where you live, same kinds of representation issues, whether you live in a rural versus urban, high versus low income neighborhood, and then the next part would be sort of around the data systems itself, as in, what systems are available, what kind of data infrastructure is available for different people. So again, covered a lot. But I think the example you were saying about that grocery store and how you can sort of choose or not, and it's sort of similar to that. But I think so. There's just a number of examples. Probably one of the most salient ones, at least right now, obviously, the COVID pandemic and, emerging monkeypox pandemic and whatever, healthcare data is sort of top of mind for everyone. And I would say, so the example there is kind of, we know healthcare as a field really lags behind other sectors in terms of getting updated digital technologies and kind of, as a result, updated data collection systems. It's probably the sector that's actually the furthest behind in terms of high quality data collection. And researchers are using health data for everything. They use it to measure the efficacy of new treatments and devices and looking at the different social determinants of health. But when we don't have that robust data infrastructure to kind of extract the information that we need from registries or electronic health records or, patient-owned wearable devices, I have one on my wrist right now. That's when that kind of creates that divide of, some people and some communities are going to have access to that kind of healthcare data that will tell them, allow them to benefit from things like, precision medicine or, get a better understanding of their medical history and over time, and then other people won't. So, those gaps have a lot of different ramifications, in the right now, with electronic health records, there's only about half, maybe a little over half of hospitals in the United States kind of use electronic health record systems to exchange patient data. So that means, you might be born into an environment that collects all of this data, and then suddenly when you're age 5, you get moved to another state, your family moves to another state, so then all your data pre-age 5 kind of lost because you don't have any way, there's no data sharing system there. So I think that's one sort of data divide of, who has those electronic health records, what kind of health systems, what's their interoperability, what's the data sharing there look like, do they speak to each other? And that can even be within a state, doesn't even mean you need to move to a state. That can mean you move across the city and you change doctors. Suddenly your doctor's office doesn't have that same data that you've had for the last, however many years of your life. And so that lack of data sharing, that kind of barrier, again, it really just means less accurate diagnosing and treatments for patients. And then what happens when you get, a public health crisis like with COVID is we're having incomplete data sets across the board.
So the first thing that comes in my mind is that it's kind of like the story repeating itself, right? I didn't look in depth in the report, but I've scanned through it. And of course, you referenced already rural area, thinking education, race. And it's kind of like, if you were disadvantaged before, now you're probably getting this too coming your way.
Well, everything's at scale when you throw digital in front of it, right? So
Right.
Whatever it was before, it's just amplified.
Yeah, and
Right,
of course, one of the first thing that come to mind, and I think we already kind of discussed that, is the health data. But you can think in terms of, again, education, transportation, possibility to get a job, and I mean, I think we can go on. And I was kind of scanning through. So I'd love to hear some other, not much case study, but like all these things that are affecting people. Is it connected also to racial profiles, to income? I'm sure that's one of the basic one, but is it really following the same step where the gap is getting bigger and bigger instead of using technology to kind of make everybody, more involved in our society at an equal level?
I think the patterns that I kind of trace through, they often sort of follow those historical patterns. And one of the big things is, we need policymakers to focus on this right now because, as we're moving further and further into this sort of data-driven economy, the same groups that have been left behind for the last 100 years, those gaps are only going to widen. And that's sort of the philosophy, obviously, also with the digital divide concept. So it really follows on that. But yeah, I mean, I think the key thing here that sort of turns the issue on its head is, we're worrying a lot about, like you said, sort of racial profiling and all those things. And obviously there are issues that we need to be solving. But I think what it is when we start to get into these really heated discourses about, things like algorithmic bias or artificial bias and artificial intelligence, I think what this report is trying to do is take a step back and saying, we're almost getting ahead of ourselves with that. Obviously, those systems need to have oversight, and we need to worry about what that oversight looks like. But we're not really focusing on those core inputs. So again, it's sort of we're getting ahead of ourselves. And here I'm saying, we need to focus on the fundamentals. What is the core inputs going into these systems, and what does that data look like? And I think when we do that, and when we actually start to build on that, I think then that will sort of slowly but surely increase trust with those communities that maybe in the past were getting really disadvantaged by some of that data-driven decision making.
And when we look at this operationally, and I've had the opportunity to discuss TEFCA, which is the U.S. National Healthcare EHR system, I guess, basically, to put it simply. And what that says to me as we paint a picture around a national healthcare system database is there's one big giant bucket of data. But even that has a set of lines drawn around, or a line drawn around it, perhaps keeping it separate from other things. And then maybe some of that is extracted and put into another bucket, and we have some overlapping buckets, maybe not connected. So I'm wondering how we need to look at all of those buckets. Do we need to formally define the buckets, the intersection of them, the ownership of them? I don't know if you look at any of that in the context of the report or the organization you're doing work for.
Yeah, so in this specific report, not necessarily something I cover, but I think it's a really interesting issue. And my instinct there is to sort of focus on the overarching buckets, right? And, right now, I think, again, this sort of tendency is to get this really hyper-specific focus, but the whole thing is that we need to take this step back and focus on, the national healthcare system. A lot of the work, and there's some really, really great work being done at the state level and local level, but then, those are not speaking to the wider system. And so I think the most potential here to kind of reduce these divides really, in my opinion, is at that federal level. And there, has been sort of some appetite, definitely has been some appetite in the Biden administration to do this and to kind of increase data equity across the board. And the sort of perspective that they're taking, which again, I agree with, is sort of, again, taking these buckets and, we're saying healthcare. And I think that's actually a really positive thing because it encompasses all those below things. And don't necessarily have the answers yet for, how do you deal when the issues of healthcare and, I mean, this may be a bad example, but let's say healthcare and financial services, they overlap, which they could theoretically, I don't have the answers yet, but I think there's a lot of interesting work in the sort of data governance space that's not necessarily my area of expertise about, how do we treat that when it kind of leaves those big systems. But right now, I think it's almost, again, getting ahead of ourselves. We need to worry about how we're getting the data to just move within the system itself and just outside of my individual computer or the hospital's individual computer. I think there's some core things we've got to worry about, and I would lean towards focus on the maybe a sectoral approach is really what I'd say there.
So I'm gonna follow the bucket thing, but I actually found a figure here, a graphic that's called the Decentralized Federal Statistical System, and I think it's kind of picturing what you just said, meaning there is all these different buckets, and I don't see that there is much of a communication there. So just to give an idea, it looks like a beehive, and you look at Bureau of Transport and Statistics, Bureau of Labor, National Agricultural, and then you have Office Research Evaluation and Statistics and Science and Engineering National Center, and everything should then connect to a central database, which will be the chief statistician of the U.S. I mean, I'm kind of reading for the audience just to give an idea of what this look like, and I'm wondering which one come first. I mean, you say we got to start somewhere, and where do we give priority right now? Do we give priority in the way that we handle the data, and then eventually we go and find the one that have been left behind, or should we actually start by getting the data from everyone and then organizing? Because what come first?
I think, again, it's a key, good question that I don't necessarily have the best answer to. And I think, again, it sort of depends on what the key political issues are right now. So, what are the hot button issues? It's really healthcare right now. So it's sort of like that's where the administration is putting their focus, and that's what policymakers are worrying about. In a year from now, that could completely change. And I think we do have to be kind of flexible in our approach and sort of, take these issues as they come and sort of try and have that one step in the future, one step in the past, trying to figure out, what is going to be the next big challenge. I might say my instinct right now is probably climate-related issues and divides there. Obviously, that's going to only increase in relevance in the coming years. So when it's sort of like what to prioritize first, I think we need a lot more federal research just sort of into where these critical data gaps are, and how they define critical might be different than how you or I define critical. But I think in my report, I kind of go through and I say the data systems are probably of the highest priority, because those affect the greatest number of people and sort of stand to do the greatest amount of harm if they're not really built correctly, or, have those wrong inputs. And so when I'm saying systems, I'm talking healthcare, financial services, education, environmental monitoring, those kinds of things that affect everyone, not just a small group, although the small groups obviously important.
Can you give me an example of the issues related to the environment?
Yeah, I think this is actually a really interesting one for me. So the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has an air quality monitoring network of, don't quote me on the exact number, let's say 3,000 air quality monitoring stations. And to be clear, they're extremely accurate and extremely high quality. They're also pretty expensive to sort of distribute and actually, collect data. So that's collecting things, about particulate matter in the air quality on a given day. And they kind of feed into this federal index that gives a score about the air quality in a given location on a given day, month, year. And so that's great. But when you hear the number 3,000, that means, think of how many places in the United States aren't going to actually have a nearby air quality monitoring station, and things become sort of problematic. So the prime example there, I'm from Philadelphia, so all my anecdotes are going to relate to that city. But now I'm going to forget the year, 2019, I think, South Philadelphia has a number of heavy industry, has a heavy industry complex, and there's a number of chemical plants there, and one of them exploded and, released a large amount of chemical toxins into the air on that day. And on that same day, the EPA air quality monitoring station closest to Philadelphia recorded Philadelphia as having one of the cleanest air days of the entire year. And again, it was the day of a chemical refinery explosion. So something is clearly not adding up in terms of the, environmental monitoring there. And so what I'm saying with those data gaps in that regard, or the data divides there, sort of, where you live will determine how accurate that kind of government data really is for you. And as a result, I think that environmental data is so important for, community advocacy. How can you say, we live near this industrial plant and X amount of us have now, after 20 years, have now developed the same disease, but there's no proof of it. When you have those kind of air quality monitoring stations, maybe you can say, by the way, it's also been horrible air quality for the last 20 years, coincidentally. It's really important for community advocacy. Then it's really important for, city and state and federal government to make decisions about, how much resources to allocate to a given area. How do we regulate that industry in that area if they don't know that there's a massive problem going on in a certain part of a city because 50 miles away is the closest monitoring station. They're going to make decisions based on inaccurate or incomplete data. So I think it's really relevant with the environmental stuff.
Sean, I'm thinking smart cities. Are you thinking smart cities?
No.
No,
I'm not smart.
Okay, then you lose. I won. You fell. No, I mean communities and all these services, monitoring and everything. It's like when we talk, does a smart city needs to be really rich and be New York and be in a smart city, LA, or every smaller community can be somehow smart, and that will be a benefit for the community. That's why I'm thinking smart city in this context.
Yeah, I think. If we put, and I don't know if I have the right answer, probably not, but I mean, technology is fairly inexpensive. Now, maybe not the $3,000 monitors or sensors that are out there, or $3,000. So they're not $3,000, 3,000 sensors that went out that are expensive. So that goes against what I'm about to say, but I think generally speaking, I mean, if we were to try to do something individually, it would be impossible or near impossible. But if a group of people in a city or a town wanted to come together and say, we want to be smarter in the way we do things, I think technology makes that possible.
Scale,
for
right?
Sure. Certainly at scale. And perhaps I think we've had conversations to this point on smart cities where multiple cities create a little digital region and they pool their resources to do things for each other and help the greater area. Given this point that we're talking about now, my question to you, Gillian, is kind of who then is kind of leading this charge? You talked about the Biden administration and at the federal level. But in the case that you presented for the environment, it's limited to those 3,000. And perhaps there are other cities and groups looking at that for their own particular area. Do they benefit from the federal data as well, or they remain separate? And let's start there. How do we find a way to drive this innovation in a way that's meaningful for everybody?
No, definitely. I mean, I think that's a key issue, right? Is that how do we reach all the people? Because like you said, that individual level data collection or, individual monitoring kind of thing, that's really not possible. And I think it's the kind of thing we need to think through of, right, federal investment and whatever, it always will target the big cities, the New Yorks, the LAs first. And what do you do about the town of 5,000 that's 50 miles outside those cities? And I think who should be leading the charge is, it sounds like a cop-out, but it's context dependent. I think cities, it's who's sort of controlling the funds. And when it gets to the more rural areas, it's probably going to need to be the states or even the counties who are sort of more in tune. And there's some really interesting, opportunities there. I think what's kind of not thought about is sort of the data collection is always, I think we've sort of been talking about it, and that's kind of on me, of is this top down thing, like the government at large is sort of collecting the data. But I think we can also think of it in this bottom up approach, and that, data collection can really be a really participatory process. And there's a lot of examples of that. Kind of to go back to the environment thing, I think citizen science and that whole realm, which is, it's getting a little tangential, but I think that there's a lot of community level action, grassroots level action to sort of collect data on a specific topic. Now that's, again, topical. It doesn't necessarily create a perfect system that collects community data on every single thing. But I think the more that those kinds of approaches, those grassroots level approaches, are supported through top-down investment from different levels of government, and that is happening, and again, mostly in the environmental realm, but there's other potential. I think COVID's kind of opened up new doors for that.
I'm going to pause you. You're making me think about map data and traffic data, and then therefore rideshare pricing data, and when can I get a ride, and is there a ride nearby, and those types of things, which are commercially driven, right? The companies I'll say it, use the people to generate that data for them, which the user then benefits from, but then they also use that data for other purposes. So do you see a model like that coming into play, and does that have to be commercially driven, or are there other means to arrive there?
I think that sometimes the private sector is better equipped to sort of drive that, but I also would say on that kind of crowdsourced concept, there's a lot of really interesting public use cases there, especially for kind of like humanitarian aid. So in various earthquakes and sort of natural disasters in the last 5 or so years, there's been a lot of efforts, and this is kind of around the world and the United States, to sort of increase that crowdsourced data. So whether that's sort of real-time location updates via SMS or mapping kind of things, people can contribute in real time that kind of alternative data to one sort of repository, and it's usually publicly run. So I can think the Department of State has supported something called the Humanitarian Open Street Map, which again sort of maps a lot of various sites of different humanitarian crises in real time, and I think that's a really valuable use case. So I'm a big proponent of that kind of crowdsourced data, and I think it's something we actually need to think about how we can incorporate that more and more into federal statistics, especially for its potential for that real-time information. Because right now, obviously, we take the census, we complete the census however often, or the American Community Survey once a year, whatever, and that doesn't necessarily give you that real time. A lot of things change in a year, as we know. So I think the crowdsourced data is such an interesting opportunity, and obviously happening both through the private sector, but there's some really interesting public ventures as well.
And we are relatively lucky now that it takes a year to look at the data from the census. I mean, years ago, it would take a few years to get the result of the census. So really talking about old news when they come out, right? What can we do right now? So as we probably start getting into the end of this conversation, I have to make a decision, which is, one, I'm going to talk about too much data versus, bad data versus good data. And then there's the privacy and other political topics that we can bring to the table. But I think that I prefer to talk about the parallel between the data divide and the digital divide, because I can't, in my head, really divide. You get the word game there? Divide the two, right? A smartphone, that's how I share my data. That's if I have a car that follow me with the GPS, that I participate to traffic information, I participate to pollution, I participate to a lot of things. But if I don't have that device, if I don't have the connected car, if I don't have the computer, how do I get into the system? Now, given we know a lot of people that are hackers, they don't want to be in the system. They're trying to get to get away, right, off the grid. In this case, we're doing the opposite things, like, because there are good things and bad things. So did it come out that there is actually a correlation between the two, like giving the technology to people in order so that you can actually give them the pro of using this technology?
Yeah, it's obviously a correlation of, you have access to the device, you're more likely to use it and give your data. I just think the other issue that comes up, though, is, and it's sort of the same thing with the digital divide, is, for example, in schools, cities, ISPs, whoever, were giving, students laptops or their families laptops, and that's great, obviously super important. That doesn't mean the digital divide's closed. They were given, or broadband access, not given, they have access to broadband in their homes. Still doesn't mean the digital divide's closed, because they can't really make full use of it or sort of take advantage of the opportunity. And I think even more importantly, they don't necessarily trust the opportunity. So I think it's the same thing here with the data divide. We can give, or, people can access wearable devices or these kinds of things, but until they really understand how to make full use of it, we're not going to necessarily see the benefits. So I think we're kind of at a similar place with the data divide and the digital divide of, like, the hardware part almost is sort of there, but there's still the hesitancy, hostility, trust issue. It's still real. And so what to do
the
about
educational part. That you're referring to educating people, which I agree with you. I mean, even people that do have access to the most expensive technology in the world today
don't know how to use it.
Still don't know how to use it. Yeah. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Right. So I think until people understand kind of how their data, I think it's sort of on the individual level, how their data actually tangibly benefits them, which right now they don't necessarily see that. There's not necessarily a one-to-one of, oh, I gave my data here, so that means I got better X, Y, and Z. I think once you kind of make those things more obvious, and that comes through, messaging, policy, whatever, I think, we'll get more of an uptake, not only of the devices, which is not necessarily the point, but just a general more trust in the technology and data-driven technology as a whole.
Go ahead, Marco.
I'm curious to know what's the reaction of the policymaker when you present these reports? Are they very political about it and say, yeah, we'll do something, or they're like, no, we know it's a problem, we're working on it?
I think saying, like, I mean, obviously data is political. We've known that hasn't really changed in the last 3 administrations at all. So I think no matter what the party or whatever, I would say it's pretty much a nonpartisan issue. Everyone's sort of concerned about getting this better data, just because in the end, better data informs better policy. That's universally agreed upon. It doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you are on there. And so, yeah, the appetite definitely has been where we're really trying to take concrete action on this and more focusing on the statistics side. But I think, as we kind of reach higher levels of broadband deployment across the country, the FCC and other organizations that have been focusing on that specifically digital divide issue are kind of looking for, okay, what's the next thing we need to be, we need to tackle. And so there's kind of an interest there as well.
So in the spirit of the next thing, so Marco asked, what's the reaction been thus far? What do you hope folks do with the report now that it's written? Who should take action, and what should that action be? Is it limited to the politicians, or are there others that can benefit from the findings that your report found and put together?
I mean, I think at all levels of government, that's definitely what the report focuses. I mean, our recommendations focus on, have some key takeaways, and the way we need to really improve that data quality. But I think your average reader can also take away and sort of have a better understanding of, someone might not even really realize they're being put at a relative disadvantage just because they don't have access to something, or not really realize that, oh, that's a data collection issue. I think it's this framing is not really something, we're not really going through our lives and saying, oh, I have this tool in my classroom, or I have this in my bank, and thinking, oh, that's a data collection issue, or that's I'm not represented in that. That's just not how we approach it. So I think, the general public can kind of take away this thing is it's affecting everyone. It really is not just affecting a niche group of people. I can, all of us on this podcast and anyone listening, it's really everyone's affected by this in one way or another. These data divides are really broad, and they're really, stand to really grow as we move forward. Marco was saying, we used to have to wait so long to get the census data, and now we have it right away. I mean, that's only showing how we're moving at this kind of exponential speed. So the gaps are only going to widen, and it's only going to become more obvious to us the different ways we're affected if we're not kind of taking action now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big conversation, and of course, as many times we want to keep going. So maybe you can come back, and because I feel like the taking initiative. Like, I'm thinking people are listening right now, and some of them in the audience are going to be very, very technically literate, like to the point, way better than us, all three of us together. And there are going to be someone and is like, well, I just learned something. And I'm wondering if I am in that group of people or geographic area that I am part of, that described, portion of the population on the other side of the divide. I'm wondering, what could they do? I mean, would reading this report help them? Would contact their politician help them? What action these people that kind of become aware because they listen to this can do?
Yeah, I think it's contact your politician, but it's also contact, your congressperson, but it's also contact your school district. You just talk to your doctor about what's kind of things are available. It's, actually participating in the statistical collection that you can. If you receive the ACS, it's actually filling out those surveys. I think that kind of participation is really important. And then I think it's also thinking about what kind of ways you can get involved at this sort of grassroots level. What citizen science initiatives can you take part in? And I don't just mean, going out to the park and collecting air quality, but, it's thinking about how you can get your whole neighborhood to be doing that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for individuals beyond just sort of haggling your politician to do something, although that's definitely something I would support as well.
It's in the Constitution too, so
right, yeah.
I can't help just drawing on the smart cities things we touched on earlier. I just can't help but think that this can't be so new to us as a society. I mean, the reason we have towns in certain areas is because there are resources in those areas that we want to extract and mine and use and sell and distribute, and data is just another one of those, right? And I think now we're talking about our own data, so maybe there's some differences, but I feel that if we look back in time and see why big metropolitan areas form the way they did and why smaller towns remain the way they do, I don't know, maybe there's something to learn from that, or so perhaps
the data is the new river where we build the city around. All right, I think that makes sense. You go where the resources are.
We look at Neom City, and I don't know, maybe the collection of all the resources in one area in an efficient and effective way, economies of scale. I don't have the answer. I'm just thinking out loud.
Oh, we never know the answer.
Talk for hours, I think.
We never know the answer. As we always say, and I'm going to wrap with this, is if we made you think, and maybe you're going to tell a story to your neighbor or your friend about the conversation that you heard, and you guys have a back and forth about it, we did a good job. And all together, maybe we can find the answer, and all together we can take action so that we do use technology for good in our society. So,
the answer, Marco. The answer.
What's that?
The answer is 84 divided by. 84 divided by 2.
42. The meaning of life, the universe, and everything else. And with that, Gillian, thank you so much for being part of this. We know it's a big conversation, and we took about 43 minutes now of your time, and we're so glad that you share it with us. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for doing that work and bringing it to us.
Yeah, and please share resources. We will put on the notes for this episode the link to the report so that people can learn more about it, and maybe ways to get in touch with you and with the center. And with that, thank you very much. Stay tuned. We'll come back with more story on redefining society. Thank you.
BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com. Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high net worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.